All right, so you wanted a deep dive on the security culture at Quantum Systems. Well, get ready because we've got a ton of information to go through. Emails, survey data, training reviews, program plans. Oh, and we've even got comments directly from their employees.
Yeah, we've got a really unique look into quantum systems here. We can see how they approach security from all these different angles.
Before we get into it all, though, let's lay out what we're hoping to get out of this. First up, how strong is their security culture, really? We'll see if they actually walk the walk or just talk the talk, right?
Right, no sugarcoating.
Second, we've got those employee comments. We'll try to see if we can find any hidden insights or maybe even some red flags we need to point out.
And finally, we'll tie it all back to you. How does all of this impact you? What can you learn from it?
So to kick things off, let's start with the data from their security culture survey. What are some of the key things that stand out to you?
Well, the first thing I noticed is they've got some really high scores in certain areas. Like 92.2% of their employees say they never lend out their access passes. And they scored really well on questions about data privacy, too.
So they're really good at following the rules, at least when it comes to the basics. But then we see that only 39.5% actively seek out cybersecurity information. What do you make of that?
That's where things get a little more interesting, I think. It's great that they're following the rules, but are they really engaged in cybersecurity?
Right. It's one thing to not share your password because you know you're not supposed to. But it's another thing entirely to be proactively learning about security threats and staying up to date.
Exactly. It's that difference between passive compliance and active engagement.
Okay, so let's shift gears a bit and talk about their yearly security awareness program. It looks like they've got 4 main training periods throughout the year, covering things like email security, policies and procedures, password management, and MFA, and social engineering. That seems pretty thorough, doesn't it?
Yeah, it seems like they're hitting all the key points. But if you think back to that survey data, only 43.6% of employees knew where to even find their security policy.
So they might have a great program, but what good is it if people don't know where to find the information they need?
And that's a huge point. They need to make that information much more accessible and clear.
Speaking of information, let's look at their training module, the Security Culture Survey one. The reviews seem pretty positive overall, but the thing that caught my eye is that it's only 5 minutes long. Is that really enough time to cover everything?
Well, that's the whole debate around microlearning, isn't it? Some people say that short, focused bursts of information are actually more effective than long training sessions. And they do cover a lot in those 5 minutes, I'll give them that.
But shouldn't they be doing more to reinforce that information and make sure it sticks?
Oh, absolutely. They need to give employees opportunities to practice what they've learned.
And make sure it's all integrated into their everyday work. Okay, but now it's time for the really fun part. The unfiltered comments from Quantum Systems employees. This is where we get to hear directly from the people on the front lines.
And boy, do they have some things to say.
For example, one employee wrote, "Security is at level 0 on maturity and we need to start building." I mean, that's a pretty bold statement, right?
Yeah, no kidding. It suggests that this employee doesn't think Quantum Systems has a very mature approach to security.
Here's another one. This employee said, "I had to Google what MFA was, and I think we should have a policy that governs the use of AI platforms like ChatGPT to ensure that we are not unintentionally sharing sensitive or confidential information." What does that tell you?
It makes you wonder if their training is really keeping up with the latest technologies and threats.
And it highlights the need for really clear guidelines, especially when it comes to new tool like ChatGPT. Okay, but this next comment is where things get a little concerning. This employee wrote, "Quantum Systems is likely a target for industrial espionage and should take strong steps to protect IP and compute resources. Need to be more proactive with security." Now, that's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and it definitely raises some red flags. It seems like they might be overlooking some potential threats.
And maybe not being proactive enough with their security measures. Okay, let's shift gears again and take a look at some of these internal emails. We found something interesting in an out-of-office reply from Tom Reynolds, their global IT manager. He actually included his personal cell phone number right in the reply. Is that something you see a lot?
Not really, and for good reason. Sharing that kind of information in an automatic reply can be pretty risky. It's an easy way for someone to get your personal information and potentially use it against you.
Right. You never know who might be getting that email. But hey, it's not all bad news. It looks like Quantum Systems is at least trying to improve their security posture. They mentioned in one of these emails that they're planning to create a security board in 2024. What do you think about that?
It's definitely a step in the right direction. Having a dedicated team focused on security can make a huge difference.
But the key is making sure it's actually effective. They need to give the board real authority and make sure they're actually addressing the concerns of employees.
Totally agree. Otherwise, it's just another box to check off.
And we need to see real action, not just talk. Well, we've already uncovered a ton of information, and we're just getting started. We'll take a quick break, but when we come back, we'll dive even deeper into those employee comments and see what else we can learn about the security culture at Quantum Systems.
All right, welcome back to our deep dive. Last time we left off, we were just getting started with those employee comments.
Yeah, these comments are gold. They give us a real unvarnished view of what's going on at Quantum Systems.
Exactly. It's like getting a peek behind the curtain.
Okay, so here's one comment that caught my eye. Someone wrote, more focus on closing screens when leaving desks at the office. Seems like a pretty basic thing, right?
You'd think so, wouldn't you? But you'd be surprised how many security breaches happen because someone forgot to lock their computer.
Right, it's easy to get complacent when you're busy, but those little things can have big consequences.
For sure. So how can quantum systems make sure people are following those basic practices?
Well, reminders are always good.
Posters, screensavers, maybe even some friendly peer pressure?
Speaking of reminders, another employee mentioned needing to update the IT department's landing page with contact info. Outdated information can be almost as bad as no information.
Absolutely. It just creates confusion and frustration.
And if people don't know where to go for help, they're more likely to just make their own decisions, which might not be the best from a security standpoint.
Right. So clear and up-to-date information is crucial.
Okay, this next comment is interesting. This employee said, constantly changing IT team and tools making hard to keep up with best practices need more stability. They even specifically mentioned VPN issues. And we know VPNs are super important these days with everyone working remotely.
It sounds like they're struggling to keep up with all the changes.
It makes sense though, right? If things are constantly in flux, it's hard to know what the best practices even are.
Absolutely. You need a solid foundation to build a strong security culture, and that foundation needs to be stable and consistent.
Okay, here's a comment that made me think. This employee said, I never saw official guidelines here, but just do the common sense things. So is common sense enough when it comes to cybersecurity?
That's a tough one. I mean, common sense is a good starting point, but it's not always enough.
Right, what seems obvious to one person might not be so clear to another.
And cybersecurity can be pretty complex. There are a lot of nuances and technical details that most people just aren't aware of.
So you really need those formal guidelines and training to make sure everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
Here's another comment that kind of ties into that. Someone wrote, our IT group is doing the best they can, but security seems like an afterthought. Ouch.
Yeah, that doesn't sound great. It suggests that security isn't really baked into their processes and culture,
Right, it's like they're just tacking it on at the end.
instead of making it an integral part of everything they do.
So how can they change that?
Well, it starts with leadership. If security is a top priority for the executives, it'll trickle down to the rest of the organization.
Lead by example, right?
Exactly. And they need to empower employees to take ownership of security,
Make it a shared responsibility, not just something that IT deals with.
right?
Here's a suggestion from one of the employees. They said, Quantum Systems should schedule a time slot during their all-hands meetings to raise awareness and give security updates.
That's actually a really good idea. It keeps security top of mind. It makes it part of the regular conversation.
I like it, but what about the employee who just don't seem to care about security? How do you deal with them?
Well, you need a combination of education and enforcement. You want to create a positive security culture, but there also need to be consequences for bad behavior.
Right, the carrot and the stick.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about the challenges Quantum Systems is facing, but let's go back to that security board they're planning. Do you think that could be the key to turning things around?
It has the potential to be, but it really depends on how they set it up.
What do you mean?
Well, who's going to be on the board? What authority will they have? Will they be transparent with their decisions?
So it can't just be for show. It needs to have real teeth,
Absolutely.
and they need to be accountable to the rest of the company.
Right. It needs to be a true partnership between leadership, the security team, and the employees.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground here, and I think we've got a pretty good understanding of the security culture at Quantum Systems.
Yeah, we've seen both the good and the bad.
And we've talked about some ways they could improve.
But now I want to turn things over to you, the listener. What are your thoughts on all of this?
What can you take away from this deep dive and apply to your own work?
We'd love to hear your perspective.
So let us know in the comments below, and be sure to join us next time for another deep dive. Okay, so we're back and ready to wrap up this deep dive into Quantum Systems security culture. We've seen the data, read those emails, and heard what their employees have to say. What's the overall takeaway here?
You know, it's a mixed bag. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, but it's not a complete disaster either.
Right, somewhere in between. What really struck me was how they've got these really good security policies, but they're not really putting them into practice. Like, it's one thing to have a rule about not sharing passwords, but if nobody knows where to find the password policy or what it actually says, is it really doing any good?
Yeah, it's like having a fire extinguisher but not knowing how to use it. You need both the tools and the knowledge to make security work.
And those employee comments, those were really eye-opening. I mean, we got to hear directly from the people who are dealing with security every day.
And that's so valuable. They're the ones who can tell us what's working and what's not.
Right, they're the ones on the front lines. So let's say you were in charge of security at Quantum Systems. What would be at the top of your to-do list?
Communication, definitely. I'd make sure everyone knows where to find the information they need and that the information is clear, concise, and up to date.
No more hunting through the internet for outdated policies.
Exactly. And I'd also focus on creating more opportunities for employees to learn about security.
Like those regular awareness sessions we talked about.
Yeah, or maybe even some workshops where people can get hands-on experience.
I like that. Make it more interactive and engaging.
Right, because people learn best by doing.
And we can't forget about that security board they're planning.
Oh yeah, that's a big one. It could be a real game changer if they do it right.
But it's got to have real power, right? They can't just create a board and then ignore it.
Absolutely not. It needs to be a top priority for the company, and they need to make sure it's actually addressing the concerns of employees.
So it's all about communication, education, and action.
That's the recipe for a strong security culture.
But this isn't just about quantum systems, is it? I mean, these are challenges that every organization faces.
Exactly. Security is everyone's responsibility.
It's not just the IT department's job. We all need to be doing our part to protect ourselves and our organizations.
And that starts with awareness. Knowing what the threats are, understanding how to protect yourself, and speaking up when you see something suspicious.
It's like that old saying, see something, say something.
Exactly.
And never stop learning.
The world of cybersecurity is constantly changing, so we need to stay curious and keep up with the latest trends.
Well, this has been a fascinating deep dive, and I think we've learned a lot about quantum systems and about security in general.
I agree. It's been a great discussion.
And we hope you found it informative and helpful. We want to thank you for joining us on this deep dive, and we hope you'll tune in next time for another insightful look into the world of cybersecurity. Until then, stay safe and stay secure.